Well, we're back for another exciting conversation, this time on sales targets and bonus plans for your sales team.
I personally find bonuses and commissions a very exciting topic. One of my favorites.
So, what is a bonus plan and how's it different than a commission plan?
Okay, so it's pretty much a lot of companies use these interchangeably. The distinction that's practical is going to be commissions are generally thought of as percentage based, where there's a rate that's associated with the amount of sales that were achieved, and then the salesperson earns that commission. Whereas a bonus might be a little bit different. You might have a revenue target of $2 million. And if the salesperson hits that number, then they get a bonus of $4,000 or $40,000 or something along those lines. But they're essentially the same thing. There can be in different US states a important legal distinction, but we're not going to get into that. For purposes of sales and marketing, it's essentially the same thing. They're just different ways to describe incentive compensation.
So, why not just pay your salespeople a salary like you pay your accountants?
Okay, so you can do that. I think in some situations that might be a good approach. So for example, if you're a brand new company and you have no real basis on which to establish sales targets or things of that nature, yes, you could pay a flat salary. But generally, there's a few reasons that play into why most companies do this. One is because you want to recruit the top sales talent, or you want to recruit very good sales talent, and the best salespeople are attracted to the best commission plans. So as a group, I'm going to make some sweeping generalizations here. As a group, we are sort of risk seekers, salespeople, and we like to work in environments where we get rewarded for our efforts and where there's pay for performance. And commission and bonus plans offer one of the best forms of that to us. And so if you are going straight salary, let's say you were going to offer just a straight salary of $150,000, or the alternative is offering a salary of $125,000 and then a bonus or a commission that's worth $50,000 or $75,000. Most of the top performing salespeople are going to be looking at what's the maximum that they can achieve under a plan. And if it's straight salary, it's 150. If it's bonus plus commission, it's 175 to 200. And because we believe in what we do and our ability to sell things, we're going to be more attracted to that higher compensation. And so you're competing in this marketplace for talent, and that's something to be cognizant of. The other useful reason to offer bonus plans is to be able to scale your sales and to some extent marketing costs with your actual business volume. So if you are starting, this is a great example. So when we are in 2020 and all of a sudden you have all these employees on the payroll, but you're not moving any product because nobody's in laboratories anymore, nobody's using products, you don't have to pay your salespeople as much because they're not hitting their sales plans. So in the short term, that can align with your budget. Likewise, generally, if you're doing higher business volume, if you experience a surge in demand, then that allows you to pay your salespeople more to capture that demand, and you have the revenue incoming to support that expense.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that is important for people to understand is that the day-to-day process of being a salesperson, fundamentally unlike almost any other employee in the company. If you're working at the lab bench, if you're working over in accounting or in the warehouse, what you're doing day to day is really highly structured by either the project you're on, the department you're in. So there are very specific things that you're expected to do each day. Where with a salesperson, a lot of this is really about their own initiative and figuring out what the right thing is to do next to be able to maximize the outcome. It's You need to follow up on people you've talked to previously. You need to be out prospecting for new opportunities. You need to have your sort of ear to the ground for unexpected opportunities that you then will then go and follow up on. As an employee, it's a lot more of an entrepreneurial sort of workflow than exists anywhere else in the company. And so one of the reasons that you don't have a commission plan for your accountants is that the work is highly structured. And where with the salespeople, you really need that salesperson to be thinking and doing things that are out beyond what their manager would otherwise tell them to do in order to really be successful. And so you need to give them that incentive to be really, in some ways, to think like a business owner more than like an employee.
Right. Because if you pay your salespeople just straight salary, there's no incentive plan. They're going to be very efficient order takers. They're going to wait for the order to come in and they're going to take the order. And the hard aspects of the job that require extra effort, making extra cold calls or making that one more customer visit when it's already 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the day before Thanksgiving. If there's an incentive plan in place, you're more likely to get those kinds of behaviors.
The other thing in here too is that incentive plan should be a tool to basically shape the behavior of the salespeople. Because again, part of the deal is that a salesperson could potentially do many things and they could potentially go after many types of opportunities. But from a high level strategic standpoint at the company level, you often want them to preferentially go after certain opportunities versus other opportunities. And for instance, you generally want them to go after larger dollar value deals because the amount of effort it takes to sell a $500,000 deal is about the same as the effort it takes to sell a $5,000 deal. So you're going to get a lot more value if they're incented to go after larger deals. Likewise, if you've got a very high percentage of your revenue is in recurring revenue, and especially if you don't have a SaaS-based subscription process where you're needing to keep these customers continuously reordering, you're going to want some fraction of the salesperson's time spent basically going to existing customers and giving them shoulder rubs and or whatever it takes to get them to keep reordering. So there's a lot of optionality in the behavior of the salesperson that can be shaped by how the company chooses to do the sales plan. So the details of that sales plan make a huge difference.
Right. So you have to ask yourself the question, do you believe that incentives work? And most salespeople will say, yes, incentives work. But employers, shockingly, are still sometimes surprised when the incentives work and they produce the exact behavior that the plan could be predicted to produce, but it's not always what the company wanted. So I once worked for a company and the CEO would get upset at me for not visiting or calling on current customers. And this was equipment. And my reasoning was the customer already bought one of these pieces of equipment. They're barely using it. Why would I call on them again? Because they're highly unlikely to buy another piece of equipment. And so in that case, the incentive plan was set up for selling equipment. And when the incentive plan gave me the incentives and I did the activities to go sell equipment, that didn't align with what that particular CEO wanted in terms of activities.
Yeah. And the other thing that you'll often see is if you've got a wide catalog of products and you've got a particular salesperson that has somehow cracked the code on how to sell one particular item in that catalog. And a specific example from quite a number of years ago was a sales rep for Thermo in Southern California that had basically cracked the code on selling refrigerators, laboratory refrigerators. And this rep could blow their quota every quarter by just focusing on one product, even though they had 40,000 products in the catalog.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that at the corporate level that you have to ask is, are you okay with that kind of an outcome? Are you somehow wedded to the idea of selling the full catalog? Or are you wedded to the idea of hitting revenue targets and making a profit? And generally, if you've got a salesperson that's doing that, that's probably not a bad thing. And you should probably go with it and not try to inject disincentives for that kind of behavior. Because at the end of the day, the company exists to sell things, not necessarily to sell specific things. And you're there to generate revenue and generate a profit. And which I think also leads into questions about mistakes that people make when they set up sales plans. So for instance, if your behavior has no control over a given outcome, it's not an incentive. And so if you incentivize them based on profit versus revenue, you're asking them to somehow play to a metric that they have absolutely no control over. They can control how much revenue they bring in, but there's all the rest of the company is responsible for whether or not you can make it and deliver it at a low enough price, low enough internal cost to be able to make a profit on it. The salesperson has no control over that.
So that another great example that I see a lot is when salespeople get credit for the deal when the customer's invoice is paid. And my response to that is always, Do you really want your salespeople spending time calling your customers to get them to pay their bill? Because we're perhaps not as might be a little more blunt handling that kind of situation than your AR clerk, and we're definitely more expensive to do that
Right.
clerk. So why would you create that incentive? And you should be collecting over 95% of your accounts receivable anyway. So most of the time, this isn't even an issue when it comes to the finance.
Yeah. And yeah, you want to be careful what sort of conversations you're incentivizing by the salesperson, because there are conversations that are probably either much better handled or much more cheaply handled by other people. Managing reorders, customers that are on a regular reorder cycle, that's probably not a field salesperson's highest best use of their effort. You should probably have some other group, maybe within sales, that are lower cost, less experienced, that are doing that sort of highly structured outreach.
Yep, I would agree 100%.
So what are some of the other mistakes in setting up a sales plan?
So I think one common mistake is that companies will make the plan too complicated. And so this is a reaction to the first part of our discussion where we want to incentivize certain behaviors. And so then somebody will get involved, an accountant or an engineer or a founder or somebody, and they'll be like, okay, we can design the perfect plan for the activities that we want to incentivize. And if you have 10 products in the catalog, you might have like different percentages and different payouts for every single product line, or you might have split incentives for like growth versus reorders and things like that. And the more variables you add to the plan, it does a few things. One, it makes it harder for the salesperson to actually predict what they can earn, because you need a spreadsheet and possibly some scripting to actually calculate that. And you open the door to unpredictable outcomes. So you mentioned cracking the code. Some salespeople will take a complicated commission plan and actually figure out, okay, what's the least effort way for me to maximize my payout? And you probably have not done all the modeling to predict those scenarios, but I have created some of those scenarios myself as a salesperson. And I know the more complicated a plan is, the more vulnerable it is to exploitation by the salesperson. And usually you go from, hey, we designed the perfect plan, to at the end of the year, this plan didn't do anything what we wanted at all. And then the following year, like, we're going to change it to something equally complicated but different now, or we're going to reduce payouts or other sort of negative behaviors.
Yeah. And I could tell you a personal story. I went down that road myself once and came up with way too complex a plan. And that's exactly what happened, was that someone on the sales team, still don't know who, managed to figure out how to min-max the algorithm and figure out how to basically game the plan, and then shared the spreadsheet with all the other salespeople.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so which will typically happen. And so what happened was that it wasn't like you had one anomaly. It was like the entire sales team fell down that rabbit hole. And the challenge there is that if the plan is very simple, then it's very clear to the salesperson how to connect the next thing they do today with the incentives that are in the plan. The more complex that is, the harder it is for that salesperson to make that connection. And so not only does it open the door for gaming the plan, but it makes the plan increasingly less effective. And so the general rule is that you really need it to be as simple as possible and still be able to meet the minimum requirements and achieve the minimum level of incentives necessary to hit the higher level strategic business goals.
A good rule of thumb is you should be able to create a calculator that takes the inputs to the plan, revenue across the board, revenue from different categories, whatever it is, and calculates the commission on the output. And that spreadsheet should be shared with the salesperson at the time the plan is created. It should be used by the accounting department to calculate the compensation and produce a statement or a report of what commission was actually earned that can be delivered to the salesperson. And if you can't build a calculator yourself and you haven't done it in advance, it's going to open the door to disputes or disagreements about how the calculation is actually done.
Right. One other just general piece of advice is, as a general rule, you should make sure that people in finance are not involved in creating the commission plan. For whatever reason, their brains work along such different lines that every time I've seen this happen, it's ended up in just a hot mess.
Yeah.
And
their favorite tool is the cap. They're like, we can't have salespeople earning too much money, so we're going to cap it. And that is a red flag for any high performing salesperson, that this is a plan that's set up to keep me from earning incentive compensation rather than encouraging me to earn incentive compensation.
Right. And there's a famous story about Ross Perot, who in the early 60s was the number one sales rep for IBM. And he was so good that he could meet his annual quota in the first quarter. But they had a capped commission plan, and they would not uncap the plan for him. And so he talked about how he would basically coast for 2/3 of the year or 3/4 of the year, because he had no incentive to sell anything because he'd made his quota already in the first quarter. So you want to be careful about capping. And that's something that's often a mistake I see. And it's a huge disincentive for salespeople.
Yeah, I would agree on that. There's the other thing that happens with caps or with finance is they'll create carve-outs. And so we want to carve out deals that are too big or certain types of deals. So for example, if you're selling just to end users, particular reagent or kit, and then the salesperson turns up a deal for OEM production by somebody else, that's worth 10, 20 times as much in terms of revenue. There's people in the company that will want to try to figure out, how can we weasel out of the commission for this? And you could say whether it's up in the air whether you want to have a separate bucket for OEM deals or not, or whether you want to try to anticipate those scenarios. But it's hard to look at unexpected profitable business that's coming in, that's brought by the salesperson, and say it would be bad or unaffordable to pay the salesperson for bringing that in. It's a hard justification.
So what about residuals? So a case where you close a deal, and say an OEM deal, it's a large dollar amount that's going to extend over the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So do you get commission on first year's revenue? What about the second and the third year?
I think it depends on how hard that business is to win. So if we're talking about something that has like a contract value, where, especially if it's a ramp up, where a customer is committed to a certain volume over a 3-year period, but there's ramps put in, again, if there's not an accounting for that, if we're just paying straight commission, the salesperson is going to say, okay, I'm going to prioritize the deals and the customers that are going to pay the most money and earn me the most commission in the short term. So they're not thinking long term, they're thinking short term, because I might not be around next quarter or next year to profit from this customer. So their vision is limited to the amount of commission that they are likely to get. Now, you can, if you're setting up a plan, you can say, okay, we know the customer lifetime value is going to be X for this contract, and you use discounted cash flow, and you figure out, okay, this is what it's worth commission wise, and you can pay that to the salesperson up front. I think that's a reasonable way to approach it. The more extreme example of what you just said is, salesperson brings in a healthy amount of business, and you think, oh gosh, maybe it would be easier to just fire the salesperson before these deals close, and then we can hire somebody brand new, and then where you don't have to pay out the commission that the salesperson earned.
Which is a thing that happens.
Yeah. There's a guy on LinkedIn who specializes in fighting those kinds of situations on behalf of the salespeople. And he's often quite successful, I think. And those kinds of behaviors, it's very transparent for salespeople that have seen different commission plans. And we can look at it and we can say, okay, this employer is thinking short term with their plan, or this employer is incentivizing building long-term business by paying more commission up front for deals that have residual income, things like that.
Yeah. The other thing that I've seen that, again, is not going to escape the notice of the sales team is where you've got 10 salespeople. Each salesperson has a $2 million quota for the year. So you're expecting 20 million in revenue. But the official budget for the year for the company is 12 million in revenue. So clearly what they are fully expecting half of the sales team to fail to meet quota.
Yeah.
And they're expecting half the sales team to fail to meet quota, so they don't have to pay them commission. And a lot of times what you'll see is commission plans that you have to hit a trigger level, say 80% of quota or 90% of quota before the commission plan starts to kick in. And then there's a heavy ramp in that last 10 or 20% of the revenue. And if they set the macro environment up within the sales organization so that they can guarantee a lot of sales activity, but they can also guarantee that they won't pay any commission to half the sales team, there are companies that will do this. This is a company you should avoid if you're a salesperson. And if you're the company, you really shouldn't do this, because salespeople are not stupid. They will look at this and they will know. And you're not going to keep those budget numbers a secret. People are
Right.
going to know what they are,
And
and they can do the calculations.
yeah, the long-term result of that is you're going to have to offer increasing commissions when you advertise the position again. So when your salesperson quit with the 150K total comp plan, to recruit people in the future, you're going to have to offer even higher, because we can look on LinkedIn and we can see what the retention is for those companies. We can see who the previous rep was in that territory and call them. And that's a practice I encourage.
And salespeople are really well trained to call strangers.
Yeah.
And the deal is also in something like biotech, where you need really highly specialized talent. And because salespeople tend to move from company to company at a much higher velocity than most salespeople within biotech, any given salesperson tends to have a fair amount of experience with a lot of companies, and they tend to know a lot of other salespeople. There's probably much broader network of common acquaintances among sales teams within biotech than within any other group within a company. And so as a result, if you've been a dick about how you treat your salespeople, your future salespeople that are considering coming on board are going to know this, because someone will reach out to them and tell them, or they will reach out to other people and ask. And
Yeah.
so it is very hard to undo damaging your reputation like this among salespeople. And what happens is you end up getting this kind of reverse Darwinism, this sort of survival of the unfittest, where all of the good people are going to avoid you like the plague, and the only people you're going to be able to get are people that you don't want.
It's hard to fix those problems, but they're fortunately easy to avoid. If you have a simple plan where the incentives and the expected behaviors are clear, you can avoid this. Sometimes, yes, some of your salespeople are gonna make more money than you might have originally wanted to pay them, but if the plan is designed properly, that's gonna be backed by actual revenue that's coming in to support that.
A couple of closing questions. At the macro level, what sort of commission rates should a company be expecting to pay out? Assuming that you had 100% quota, what percentage of, usually it's either a percentage of base salary or it's a percentage of gross revenue?
So I guess within life science research tools, which is the market I know best for compensation, that would be, you'd have a commission or bonus plan that's equal to 50% of base salary. So if base salary is 100, commission plan would be 50K. Sometimes that'll stretch higher. It might be like 90, 60, something like that. But it's a marketplace where if you're offering a base of 50 and a commission of 100, that is usually a signal to the salesperson that, okay, this is a much riskier type of opportunity than the job that pays 100K base salary and 50K commission. So I think that's good. Now, it might be something that's pretty easy to sell. You might be able to demonstrate to people you recruit that, hey, we have a 50K base salary and a 100K commission that's uncapped. And that might actually attract some high performers, if the high performers can look and see, okay, yeah, the company has retained salespeople and most salespeople are hitting quota for that. I think that can be appropriate. The flip side of that is, if you're a startup company and you haven't sold a single thing yet and you're hiring a salesperson, I think it's appropriate to have the compensation be much more strongly weighted on base salary, or alternatively to guarantee a certain commission payout for the first year or whatever period of time is appropriate.
And something that I've done with startups at launch is you want a fairly experienced initial one or two salespeople. But the problem is, if you incentivize them with a very high salary, once things get going, you can't really come back in and reduce their salary.
Yeah.
They're either going to quit or you're going to have to fire them. And so what's often better is to start with a market level salary, but then have a guaranteed bonus for that first year. That will then, in the second or the third year, it'll be revisited, and with the idea of, once we have some track record and we can make some projections, then this will be converted into a sales bonus. And there you're going to be able to attract a very strong initial one or two people, and you're going to be able to hold them for the long haul with that. Where if you screw that up in the beginning, there's no coming back. You're going to end up losing them. And you really don't want to do that as an early stage company.
It's expensive to have to retrain people. And again, it can be avoided by hiring the right person and offering an appropriate compensation and being pretty clear about what expectations are.
So if anybody has questions or struggling with their sales commission plans, reach out to us. We both have a lot of experience, and this is something that I know I certainly work with companies on. And we've seen a lot of versions of this, and we've seen a lot of things that don't work and a lot of things that do work. It's useful to have that kind of expertise at hand when you're trying to put one of these together, because the mistakes are extremely costly, both in terms of losing really high performing talent and also in terms of not being able to really hit the revenue targets that you potentially could be able to.
Yep, agreed. Till next time, Dale.
Until next time.